I record this not as a sermon, but as evidence. My name is Adept Scribe Kyle Vaith, seconded from the Ministerum's office of Pilgrim Registries, and I swear by the seal on my data slate that every word is true. My transport reached Clyde's 9 at 0400 local, a cold dawn thick with incense and frost. This shrine world was supposed to be a place of warmth and penitence. Instead, each breath left crystals on my lips as though the air itself were dead. The 122nd Mirian Guard waited on the landing dais, boots rimed with ice, las rifles slung. I was assigned to them as witness and chronicler of the mass reception of war orphans, thousands lifted from the ruined fronts of the eastern fringe. Officially, the children had been gathered for baptism, catechism, and reassignment to new foster orders. Unofficially, whispers of psycho evaluation passed between administratum clerks. I tried not to listen. We marched from the landing port toward the prayer dome of St. Erethes, the largest basilica on the planet. Its iron ribs arched over a kilometer high, and yet the sky within was dim, hung with unlit chandeliers like constellations gone dark. Steam drifted from the furnace grills at our feet, but no warmth rose. I clutched my stylus harder. The orphans filed 2 by 2 ahead of us. They wore grey smocks, bare feet blackened from transit, eyes downcast. I counted them as instructed, 391. They moved with uncanny precision, like beads sliding along an abacus. Then, before any order was given, every small mouth opened at once and a sound issued forth. It was a litany I had copied once in the archives of Sanctum Fervidus, the Canticle of the Veil, reserved for saints whose relics are lost to the warp. No living choir had sung it in 5 millennia. Yet these children intoned it perfectly, syllables crisp, pitch exact, pauses matched to the old rubrics. I felt my pen stop, my throat closed. Even the guardsmen glanced at each other. Sergeant Reen barked for silence. The chant rolled on undiminished, as if our air and their voices occupied separate realities. I toggled my Vox recorder. Its runes flared red, no input detected, but the waveform pulsed on my display. Every frequency of the chant etched into a silent file. I wrote in the margin, forbidden knowledge, immediate report. We reached the dome's threshold. Brass doors higher than a titan groaned inward. Frost fell from their hinges in sheets. Inside, candles guttered but did not melt. Wax pillars looked like carved bone. The guard formed ranks along the nave. I moved to the lectern to log arrival time, fingers stiff. "Why is it so cold?" I asked a priest attendant. He only murmured a benediction and walked away. The chant shifted key. My head swam. Each child now faced inward toward the center aisle, though none had moved that way. Their shadows pointed in opposite directions from their bodies, as if a second light source burned somewhere unseen. Comms chatter crackled. Over the guardsmen's microbeds, snippets escaped. No thermal anomalies. Vox phantoms in the sub-corridors. Duplicate head counts. Sergeant Wren's face hardened. He ordered perimeter patrols. 2 squads peeled off into the flanking corridors. I trailed behind to inspect the Vox casters mounted in the transept. Their readouts flickered green, showing audio capture active. Yet the decibel meter flat-lined at 0. In the silence of the machine spirits, the children's chant still thundered. I bent closer. For a heartbeat, the speaker grill felt warm beneath my palm. Then a voice, not a child's, whispered through, "Kyle Vaith, you have been here before." I reeled back. No one was there, only the chill, the incense, and the unbroken procession. Returning to the nave, I saw frost spreading across the marble in fractal lines, curling toward the orphan's feet. The furnace vents continued to exhale steam, but it crystallized mid-air. My stylus slipped from my glove and cracked on the floor. Sergeant Wren reported in. The patrol squads claimed they could hear the chant in empty corridors far from the children. One private had followed the sound to a dead end and found fresh footprints, small, bare toe prints leading into a sealed wall. The sergeant demanded confirmation from me as assigned scribe. My voice shook as I recited the protocol for anomalous pilgrimage behavior. He swore under his breath and ordered the guard to lock the dome's exits. I knelt, pretending to check my data slate. In truth, I was staring at the frozen filigree of my own breath on the screen. The pattern matched a sigil I had once seen on a warp-wrecked frigate. A sigil of Saint Erathis reversed. The children's litany crescendoed. One by one the chandeliers ignited, with ghost blue flame without fuel or spark. Shadows lengthened like claws. The incense burned sweet, then sour, then metallic. I felt something shift under the floor, a heartbeat larger than the dome itself. The Voxcaster behind me clicked once, a machine's parody of a human tongue. When I turned, every child had stopped singing. They stared at me as one, eyes glassy, lips still moving in silence. On my Vox display, the waveform spiked, frequencies beyond any mortal choir. The same chant now registered simultaneously from every corridor microphone across the shrine complex, even those cut off from power. I wrote the words without thinking. They are singing where they are not. Then the lights died. The lamps guttered, back to life one by one, pale and reluctant. The children had resumed their chant as if no pause had occurred, but softer now, undertones like breath drawn through teeth. Sergeant Reen's orders cut across the Vox. Phase 2. Move them below. I fell in behind the column, as the guard ushered the orphans toward the dome's south transept, where a lift platform yawned open. The Shrine World's pilgrim brochures had never mentioned any sub-level sanctum. My data slate showed only blank grid lines under the dome. Yet the lift's cage bore the sigil of the Ordo Hereticus scorched into its brass. The children filed inside without hesitation, their small feet soundless on the frost-slick metal. The guardsmen herded them in squads of 20, scanning retinas and palms with cogitator wands. Each screen flashed green, but the readings scrolled gibberish binharic before clearing. A tech priest muttered litanies of data purity, mechadendrites clacking. I logged each detail automatically. Formation spacing, uniform gait, ambient temperature at -3, despite furnace output. My stylus trembled. Every time the Auspex swept across the group, a thin metallic taste flooded my mouth as though iron filings floated in the air. Warp leakage. Faint but unmistakable. The lift groaned downward. Candles mounted on the cage walls flickered upside down. My stomach churned as gravity shifted in pulses. Children clutched nothing. They merely stared at the great floor, lips moving to the litany's silent verses. We descended into a tunnel carved of black stone veined with frozen water. Icons of unknown saints stared from alcoves, faces eroded smooth. The cold here was absolute, a monastery of frost. I rubbed my gloved fingers until the joints ached. At the base of the tunnel, an archway opened onto a vast chamber, the sanctum cradle, a space I had never seen on any registry. Pillars of brass and bone spiraled upward into darkness, pulsing faintly like veins. Cogitator stations ringed the perimeter, their screens running green code faster than eyes could follow. The guardsmen formed a perimeter. Tech priests began biometric scans, one child at a time. I watched from a lectern as each tiny figure stepped forward, was measured and stepped back. Names and numbers scrolled across my data slate, but the entries repeated at irregular intervals, as if duplicates were being created. On the 12th scan, a warning glyph blinked. No data returned. The tech priest tried again. The wand passed through the child's chest without resistance. For a second, the figure flickered like a picture record. Then it was gone. No alarm blared. No one screamed. Only a faint burnt smell lingered, like incense and ozone. On the Auspex display, a single image remained. A black shadow of a child burned into the grid, like a photo negative. Sergeant Wren swore and signaled a lockdown. But the other children did not react. They shuffled forward in perfect cadence, eyes downcast, chant steady. I could hear the missing child's voice still woven among theirs, higher, fainter, yet there. I scribbled in the margin, entity persists after absence. My hand cramped, the metallic taste thickened. I coughed and saw a faint shimmer rise from my breath, like heat haze but cold. The vox clicked. A child's voice whispered my title, not my name, then cut. I moved closer to the queue, compelled by some archivist instinct. One girl no older than 8 clutched a leather devotional book too large for her hands. Its cover bore the sigil of Saint Erathis, but reversed, like the frost filigree I had seen on my screen earlier. She stepped up for scanning. The wand hissed, spitting Binharic curses, but cleared her with a green rune. She looked up at me without expression and held the book out. I took it. My gloves felt damp, though it was dry. Inside, cramped script filled every page. Not Gothic, but Ministorum field shorthand. My field shorthand. Paragraph after paragraph of my own phrasing, copied perfectly from reports I had never submitted. At the center of the book, one page lay blank, except for a name written in fresh ink. Kyle Vaith, my name. Under it, a date set 3 days in the future. I felt my pulse hammer. My stylus dropped again, clattering on the sanctum floor. The girl closed the book without a word and stepped back into formation. Sergeant Reen called for my confirmation. I could not answer. The chanting had shifted pitch, vibrating in the stone itself. The Auspex shadow of the vanished child pulsed once, then split into 2. I stared at the book in my hands. My name glimmered wetly, though no ink smeared my glove. Somewhere behind the pillars, a heartbeat larger than the chamber thudded once. The stairwell spiraled downward, like a drill bit into the planet's marrow. Brass steps underfoot, hissed with frost. Our breath rose in pale banners that clung to the ceiling, before drifting back down. Sergeant Wren led with 2 guardsmen, rifles raised, Auspex pings clicking at irregular intervals. Behind them, the children moved in 2 precise columns, heads bowed, still murmuring their silent litany. My boots rang on the steps. The devotional book weighed heavy in my satchel. Its presence felt like a pulse against my ribs. Every few meters, servo cherubs floated out of wall niches. Rusted cherub faces with corroded wings. Data tongues flicking. They whispered Binharic strings I didn't recognize. Loops of code older than the current Ministorum schema. Older, perhaps, than the Great Crusade. The Margos accompanying us cocked his head, lenses irising wider, and muttered counterprayers in high cant. We reached the first landing. Here the walls were no longer stone, but a lattice of cables and vertebrae like conduits. Candles had been bolted along the ribs at regular intervals. Their flames burned blue, casting no heat, shadows bending toward rather than away. I noted the anomaly into my slate with stiff fingers. My pen scratched like a blade. Water dripped from somewhere above, but each drop hung in midair before reversing course and slipping back upward. When a guardsman reached to touch one, it burst into frost dust and cut his palm. He hissed, but stayed silent. The children began humming, 3 soft notes rising and falling in a pattern I recognized instantly. Once, aboard the wreck of the Mercy of Val, I had heard a dying psyker mouth the same motif before she imploded. The memory clawed my throat. I wanted to speak, but my jaw locked. The Magos tapped his staff to the floor. Sparks leapt but fell upward. "Warp resonance," he whispered. Voice clipped by Vox filter. Not sanctioned. Not recorded. We pressed deeper. The stair opened into a hall like the nave of a subterranean cathedral. Pillars of metal and fossilized bone rose into unseen vaults. Between them stood relic machines shaped like giant cradles, each fitted with restraints and cogitator nodules. Some still pulsed with dim light, others lay cold, covered in rime. The servo-cherubs clustered overhead, their whispers blending into a static hiss that became almost words. I walked among the machines, stylus shaking. Plates of bronze bore etched names scratched out, replaced with binharic numbers. Gossamer tubes like veins dangled from empty sockets. My skin prickled with static. When I drew near one cradle, the blue candles brightened and my breath crystallized midair. A guardsman crossed himself. Another muttered a catechism of protection. Sergeant Rain snapped at them, but his voice lacked force. The children had stopped humming. Now they stood perfectly still, heads tilted as if listening to something under the floor. I knelt to examine a drain where water reversed its flow. The stone felt warm, pulsing faintly. Beneath the grate, something moved, too slow for sight, but heavy enough to shift the frost. I backed away, forcing my breath quiet. The Magos keyed his staff into a console on one cradle. Data glyphs flared, scrolling ancient binharic. Pre-compliance pattern, he muttered, awed, no record in the Martian liturgies. One of the servo-cherubs broke from its orbit and descended, wings grinding. It hovered near my ear and whispered a phrase in low Gothic. "We have been waiting for you." Then it fluttered back, shedding flakes of rust like blood. The 3-note hum returned, stronger. Children's lips did not move, but the sound pressed against my skull from within. My data slate flickered. The devotional book inside my satchel grew cold enough to burn through cloth. Rain ordered a sweep of the chamber. Guardsmen spread out, auspexes whirring. The machines responded, lights blinking in sequence like a heartbeat. Frost cracked underfoot in geometric patterns, sigils forming and erasing. My pen recorded them automatically, hand moving as if guided. A candle sputtered out with a hiss. Darkness thickened. Then another and another, until only the blue glow of the machines lit the hall. At the far end stood a sealed door of black metal, without seams. No hinges, no locks. Its surface shimmered, like oil on water. The Magos scanned it. Readings returned, null. No data, no matter. The children turned toward the door as one. Their eyes reflected the blue light, irises pale as ice. The 3 notes climbed into a chord that vibrated in my teeth. I clutched my satchel, heart hammering. Without command, the sealed door shuddered. Lines of frost raced across it, then retreated inward as if being inhaled. A seam appeared. Metal folded like cloth. A breath of air escaped, warm and sweet like cradle smoke. Inside was darkness deeper than the void. My auspex registered shapes, rows upon rows of narrow beds, fitted with restraints, each line with ragged leather straps and cogitator cables dangling like umbilicals. A nursery. Something moved within, slow and deliberate. The door's warm breath faded as soon as it opened, replaced by a chill that bit through flak and parchment alike. Beyond lay the nursery's restraint cradles, each bed wired to dormant cogitators. Sergeant Reen held up a hand, and the column halted at the threshold. His microbead clicked as he opened a channel to the comms officer topside. The response came in bursts of static. Personnel count. Anomalous drop. Another hiss. Still no movement detected. I glanced at my data slate. The roster that had read 391 children at arrival now showed 378, but every auspex in the chamber confirmed all still present. My fingers tightened on the stylus. Wren ordered a perimeter inside the nursery. Guardsmen advanced with deliberate steps, laser guns raised but muzzles lowered. Blue candles along the cradles flared brighter, casting shadows that bent inward to meet at our feet. I felt pressure in my ears, a low thrum like a distant engine turning. The Margos stalked toward a central console, mechadendrites tasting the air. He keyed in Binharic strings older than the Imperium itself. Screens guttered, then poured code across the glass. I leaned over his shoulder. Each child's biometric file pulsed on the display. At the end of each line, a ghost entry appeared, duplicate of the same file, but with a timestamp exactly 66 minutes later. I watched 3 more duplicates blossom as we stood there. The Margos hissed a prayer of cleansing, but the code ignored him. I whispered, "Replication?" He replied flatly, "Gestation." The heartbeat thrum grew louder. Frost feathered outward from the consoles. My breath came in shallow plumes. Across the room, servo-cherubs hung motionless, their wings extended like crucifixes. The children had fallen silent, but still faced the restrained cradles, eyes glassy. "Weapons ready," Wren barked. Rifle safeties clicked off, power packs whining. But no discharge inside. "This is still a sanctified site." His voice trembled on the word sanctified. A guardsman muttered, "With respect, sir," but Wren cut him off. "You fire without my word. You answer to the order." I backed toward a pillar. The devotional book in my satchel pulsed cold, hot, in time with the low thrum. My stylus recorded without my looking. Personnel counts dropping, heartbeat in walls. The comms officer's voice cracked again in my ear. "Numbers off by 24 now. Still seeing them on thermal, but not on auspex." Another burst of static. Hearing their chant in the elevator shaft. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to focus. The chamber's geometry shifted subtly. The distance between pillars stretching and contracting like breath. My boots slid a few centimeters without moving. Then the sound came. Not a thrum now, but a heartbeat, deliberate and huge, echoing through the walls and floor. Dust drifted down in time with it. Each pulse rattled the blue flames into spires. My teeth ached. Rain lifted a hand to still his men. "Hold positions." His knuckles were white on his laser gun. The Margos whispered a string of Binharic numbers that I recognized from forbidden catechisms, coordinates of warp entries. His mechadendrites curled inward, tips sparking. I forced myself to step toward the console. "Show me the deepest scan," I said, voice thin. He flicked a rune. The display zoomed downward through strata of rock and void shafts beneath the basilica. Layers of conduit, bone and frozen water peeled away. At last the auspex stopped at a depth beyond mapped records. A single sigil pulsed there. No shape, only a rhythm. The heartbeat. Size indicator flashed. Mass greater than Baneblade. Another pulse. The floor vibrated. The restraint cradles rattled in place, straps slapping. The children tilted their heads back, mouths opening though no sound came. Frost cracked across their skin in fractal lines. Reen swore, voice breaking. All squads, fall back to stairwell. The heartbeat pulsed again, closer. A sound felt more than heard. Blue candles blew inward as if inhaled. Servo cherubs twitched and fell from the air like dead birds, their wings clattering on the metal floor. My data slate flashed a single line repeated over and over in my own field, shorthand. You have already seen the cradle open. The devotional book shifted in my satchel as though something inside it had turned over. Another pulse. The sealed floor at the nursery's center bulged upward once, like a lung drawing breath. The heartbeat in the floor subsided to a tremor, leaving the chamber unnaturally still. Only the soft hiss of our breath and the ticking of cooling lasgun capacitors filled the silence. Ren held his men in a tight perimeter, eyes darting toward the bulged nursery floor. The children stood motionless, hands clasped as if in prayer. Recon sweep, Reen ordered at last. Find every exit. Mark anomalies. His voice was steady but brittle. I followed a pair of guardsmen toward the far transept, stylus poised over my data slate. The devotional book in my satchel had gone cold again, like a block of ice against my side. Servo cherubs lay in fragments along the floor, wings twitching weakly, whispering Binharic strings that dissolved into static before finishing. The transept opened onto a gallery lined with stained glass panels. At first glance, they resembled the usual hagiographies. Saints triumphant, relics raised, heretics scourged. But the central panel made me stop. It showed a robed saint, face eroded into blank glass, cradling a mass of infants whose features had been smoothed away. The posture of their tiny arms matched exactly the stance of the children in the nursery. Hands folded across torsos, heads bent. Even the number depicted, 391, corresponded to my arrival count. I reached for the panel without thinking. Its surface was warm, not cold. When my palm pressed flat, the glass yielded like skin and pulsed once beneath my touch. Slow, deliberate, like the heartbeat in the floor. I yanked my hand back. Frost blossomed where my skin had been. Catalog this, I whispered to myself, recording every detail. Panel dimensions, iconography, deviation from approved sound lists. No known canon listed such a figure. The Adeptus Administratum envoy, a pinched man named Drax, arrived behind me with 2 aides. He dabbed his nose with a cloth, muttering about liability and jurisdiction. If the panel is heretical, he said, we must file an immediate site seal petition. No unsanctioned veneration may proceed. Ren barked a laugh without humor. You think paperwork will stop this? Drax straightened his robes. Protocol exists for a reason. We cannot simply... His words cut off as the blue flames along the gallery dimmed to embers. The children's chant seeped through the walls, distant yet close, like a memory replaying in my skull. I turned back to the panel. The blank saint's arms shifted fractionally, enough to notice. The faceless infants now faced outward instead of inward. My breath caught. The Margos moved in, mechadendrites scribing wards on the floor. Glass substrate behaving as wetware, he said flatly. Suggest remote interaction only. Ren lowered his lasgun but did not sling it. We're not touching anything else. The envoy snapped. I will file the petition regardless. This site will be sealed. His aides scribbled frantic notes. I felt the panel's warmth still lingering in my palm. The stylus in my other hand wrote of its own accord. Sant without face, infants without souls, mirror of present. Another heartbeat rolled through the chamber, this one higher pitched, like breath drawn through a pipe organ. Dust rained from the vault above. The blue flames flared once, then steadied. From behind us came a sound, a child's voice, clear and resonant. Coordinates confirmed. We spun. A boy no older than 7 stood apart from the line of orphans. His eyes were milk white, his lips cracked but smiling faintly. When he spoke again, the tone was not his own, but a harsh, aged voice full of static. By Inquisitorial Warrant LXI/444-Maelstrom. I recognized the cadence, an Inquisitor's transmission code I had once transcribed from a lost frigate's Vox log. But that Inquisitor had died 2 centuries ago. The child's head tilted back. His voice deepened further, rattling the glass panels. Target coordinates. Maelstrom. Segmentum obscurus. Do not return, the stained glass saint pulsed in answer, a ripple of light running down its faceless form. My stylus snapped in my grip. Reen stepped forward but hesitated at the edge of the blue glow. Name yourself, he demanded. The boy's mouth opened wide. A third voice, neither child nor Inquisitor, poured out. A string of numbers, long and slow, echoing like sonar through the chamber. The floor trembled once more. The nursery door behind us hissed, its seam widening a fraction. I clutched the devotional book in my satchel. Its cover was warm now, heartbeat matching the pulses in the glass. Another ripple ran through the panel. The faceless saint's arms opened wider, as if in welcome. The boy finished the coordinate string, then whispered a final phrase in Binharic too old for me to pass. The lights flickered. Somewhere below, the giant heartbeat answered. My hands shook as I scrolled through the cogitator's hidden partitions. Binharic strings I had never seen streamed down like falling scripture. Each header bore a single phrase in archaic Martian. Doctrina infantem, warp non baptizatus. Doctrine of the unbaptized warpling. The Margos leaned closer, his lenses flaring. Not for your eyes, he rasped, but his mechadendrites trembled as if in prayer. Line after line described a mechanicus experiment lost to record. Infants bred from Psyker gene stock, raised not as wards but as keys, living resonance locks to open pathways sealed since the Great Crusade. The children were to be scattered across shrine worlds until the day they were summoned back to the cradle for activation. I copied the fragments onto my slate in field shorthand. The devotional book at my side seemed to pulse with each entry, as if approving. Sergeant Wren barked at his men to hold formation. The children had resumed their 3-note hum, this time in a syncopated rhythm like marching boots. Blue flames quivered in sympathy. I tried to uplink my slate to the orbiting transport. Vox runes glowed green for a heartbeat, then a burst of static erupted. Not noise, but children's laughter, layered and endless. The sound crawled under my skin. Signal jam, I whispered. Reen growled, not a jam. A presence, a guardsman across the chamber, muttered a prayer and raised his laser gun. Without orders, he fired at a flicker near the stained glass panel. The bolt hissed, but no scorch mark appeared on the glass. Instead, a perfect after-image of the guardsman himself shimmered on the panel, frozen mid-shot, eyes wide. He staggered back, pale. That's me. The after-image rippled once, then stayed. Rain cursed and ordered safeties engaged. No more shots. Not near the relics, I recorded the phenomenon. Energy discharge creates photonic double of initiator. My throat felt dry, metallic. Another guardsman whispered, "They're stealing us." The Margos extended a mechadendrite toward the after image, but withdrew before touching. Quantum echo, he muttered. Or a soul print. The three-note hum swelled, drowning our voices. Frost filmed the walls, forming glyphs from the scripture I had just copied. My stylus moved of its own accord, tracing them in the air. Ren pressed a palm to his bead. Command. This is Ren. Site compromised. Request extraction. Only silence answered. Then a burst of children's giggles so loud he tore the bead out of his ear. I knelt at the console, desperate to send one message. Each time I keyed a rune, the screen filled with reversed catechisms. My own words typed back at me, before I wrote them. The blue flames elongated into spears. Shadows peeled off the walls and pooled at our feet. The air smelled of scorched copper, though nothing burned. I glanced up and froze. Across the chamber, near the stained glass saint, an after-image shimmered into being. Not of a guardsman this time. Not of the Margos. Of me. It stood a few paces away, stylus in hand, head bowed as if writing. Its lips moved in silent prayer. The glow around it flickered cyan and green. My breath caught. I raised a hand. The double did not mirror me. It continued writing, scribbling furiously on an invisible slate. I whispered, Ren. He followed my gaze. Emperor preserve. The after-image lifted its head. Its eyes were hollow, full of drifting symbols. It smiled faintly. The same strange smile I had seen on the orphan holding the devotional book. Then it took a step forward without sound. We left the cradle behind, following a stair that seemed to wind both downward and upward at once. The after-image of myself remained in the chamber, still writing, its glow dimming as distance grew. My stomach churned, but I kept moving, stylus clenched in a fist. The stair opened into a vault, wider than a cathedral nave. Banners of sanctified silk hung from unseen beams above, except above was no longer above. Gravity flipped in pulses, tugging at boots, blood, and breath. Each time it shifted, the banners swung upward to point like spears toward the floor. Candles bolted to the walls dripped flame rather than wax. The children entered first. As the next gravity pulse struck, they stepped calmly onto the ceiling, feet finding perfect purchase. Their reverse silhouettes stretched down toward us like shadows cast by an alien sun. Lips moved in unison, but the sound was wrong. Catechisms recited backward, syllables clicking like insects. Sergeant Reen's orders came sharp. Form perimeter, counter litany, page 60. The guardsmen dropped to one knee, rifles braced but muzzles low, reciting the prescribed lines. Blessed be the closed gate, sealed and never opened. Their voices overlapped the reverse chant, a discordant braid of sound. Lay's gun charge indicators flickered between ready and null as the air ionized. I huddled near a pillar whose carvings resembled vertebrae. My data slate logged temperature oscillations, gravitational flux intervals, and the children's reversed verses. Each pulse of inverted gravity lifted my stomach to my throat. Across the vault, the Margos planted his staff into a socket in the floor, mechadendrites anchoring like roots. He whispered Binharik words to stabilize his frame. Empyrean shear, he murmured. A boundary folding inward. The devotional book in my satchel throbbed against my ribs. Its pages fluttered though it was closed. My stylus scratched. Banners hang upward, time tastes of iron, reversed catechisms like glass breaking. Another pulse. Dust rose from the floor and hung like stars overhead. The children's eyes reflected teal light. Some reached down with their hands, as though testing an invisible surface between us. Ren paced behind his line, voice taut. Hold the chant. No weapons discharge. Do not let them touch you. A guardsman beside me whispered, Sir, it's like they're walking on. But his words were swallowed as a new pulse hit. Gravity flipped completely. For a heartbeat we all floated, then slammed back down. The children did not stumble. They walked serenely along the ceiling, bare feet leaving frost prints. One girl paused above a broken reliquary, tilting her head at me. Her lips moved, shaping my name, though no sound came. My stylus froze. The Magos hissed a string of code. They are keys. The vault is the lock. Ran barked, keep your litanies strong. Guardsmen's voices rose louder, overlapping, some cracking with strain. Frost spread across their armor plates like veins. Another pulse. Blue flames turned green, then black. The banners flapped upward, exposing sigils stitched on their undersides. Sigils not of the Emperor, but of something older. Geometries that made my eyes water. I pressed a hand to my temple. The devotional book's heartbeat matched the gravity pulses now. Then it happened. A boy dropped lightly from the ceiling during a moment of 0G, landing soundlessly before the line. He walked forward unarmed, palms open, head bowed. His chant continued in reverse syllables, echoing like a spool unwinding. Stop, Ren shouted. Two guardsmen moved to block him, but hesitated at the memory of the after images. The boy raised one small hand and placed it gently on the nearest guardsman's helm. No flash, no scream. The soldier dissolved into ash as if centuries had passed in an instant, armor collapsing around nothing. The laser gun clattered hollowly to the floor. Only the helm remained upright in the boy's palm for a heartbeat before falling. The boy stepped back, eyes blank, and resumed walking toward the ceiling as gravity pulsed again. My data slate fell from my hands. The ashes of the dissolved guardsman drifted upward like gray snow, caught in the fluctuating gravity. His empty armor clanged once and lay still. No one spoke. Even the Magos mechadendrites hung motionless, sparks fading. Only the children's reverse chant continued, echoing from ceiling to floor like a tide of whispers running backwards. I forced my shaking hands to pick up my data slate. Its screen flickered with inverted timestamps. Entries dated hours into the future. Paragraphs of text I had not yet written. Each line described the next minute of events, as if the slate had become a chronicle of the immediate future. The Magos crouched at a cracked reliquary, lenses whirring. Fragmentary warp resonance, he murmured. Not individuals. Components. Components of what? Rain asked, voice hoarse. I scrolled deeper into the hidden doctrine files I had copied. The Binharic header changed, resolving into low Gothic glyphs for the first time. Black ship, Theta Lamentis. Lost en route to Terra. Manifest 391 Psyker souls. My stomach clenched. They're not children, I whispered. They're fragments. Each one a splinter of a Psyker soul, harvested for the black ship and never delivered. Ren turned sharply. Meaning what? The cradle is gestating them, building a single entity out of pieces, the Magos mechadendrites curled like claws. A warp being keyed to the Emperor's own frequencies. A living saint, or a weapon, the three-note hum shifted, stretching into a subsonic hymn that rattled teeth and armor plates. My tongue filled with the taste of copper, metallic and sharp. Blue flames along the walls hissed to green, then violet. Rain's comm bead crackled with distant static. Command, respond. only silence, then faint children's laughter. I glanced at the ceiling where the children stood like upside-down statues. Their mouths were open, but no sound emerged. The hymn came from the walls themselves. Frost ran in geometric lines down from their feet, marking a sigil whose meaning I could not grasp. My data slate vibrated. Words appeared without keystrokes. Exfiltration window closing. Choose duty or survival. I swallowed hard. My instinct screamed to run, to flee up the stair and beg the orbiting ship for extraction. But another part of me, the archivist, the witness, knew this was the only record of an event hidden for millennia. If I left now, it would vanish into silence again. I began to narrate aloud for the recorder embedded in my collar. Clythe's 9, sub-level reliquary. Children confirmed as Psyker fragments from lost black ship Theta Lamentis. Cradle functioning as gestation engine. Unknown objective. My voice trembled, but stayed clear. Rain paced like a cage predator. We have to get out. This isn't a mission, it's a sacrifice. I said nothing. My stylus continued moving, tracing inverted sigils appearing on the walls. The hymn rose higher, bending sound around itself. I felt the floor tilt, the gravity stayed fixed. The devotional book in my satchel throbbed, pages fluttering though it was clasped shut. Then the comms channel crackled again, but this time not laughter. An officer's voice from the orbiting ship, thin and panicked. This is the St. Arathis Dawn. We are docked. Geller field static. Collapsing. Static. Not in the warp. The channel cut to a long, low wail like a child's cry. Rain stared at his bead, knuckles white. They're docked, he said. The Geller shouldn't... My data slate flashed inverted timestamps 2 minutes ahead. Orbital ship breach. Geller field implosion. Containment loss. I closed my eyes. The hymn drilled behind my skull like a screw. The copper taste became blood. Ren grabbed my arm. What's happening to my men? I whispered. It's not just here anymore. It's reaching upward. Another crackle of static from the comm. A single phrase, childlike yet immense. We are coming home. Blue flames went out, plunging the vault into blackness, save for the glow of our armor runes. Above, the children lifted their arms as one, fingers spread, eyes blank. The vault had fallen into a silence so dense it pressed against my eardrums. Only the echo of our boots on the frost-slick floor marked time. The hymn that had arisen from the walls in Chapter 8 had ceased, leaving a charged absence like air before lightning. Every man in the perimeter shifted his weight, eyes flicking toward the ceiling where the children still stood in impossible calm. Then, very slowly, the shadows began to move. At first, it seemed like nothing more than candle flicker. The blue-green flames licking higher, throwing the guardsmen's silhouettes long across the reliquary floor. But when the flames steadied, the shadows did not. They pooled and crawled outward, seams splitting, edges reaching toward one another like strands of wet thread. Hold your ranks, Sergeant Ryn barked. His voice cracked under the echo. The Margos muttered Bin-Harik wards and jammed his staff into a floor socket. Sparks hissed upward instead of down. They are making a lattice, he whispered through his vox filter, the pattern of an engine. I looked at my own shadow. It lay flat for a heartbeat, then rippled and joined with the shadow of the guardsman next to me. Together they lengthened toward the far wall, a single shape with 2 torsos, 4 arms, tapering into a single spear-point head. The joined mass flexed once, like a muscle testing itself, then went still. Across the chamber, similar mergings happened, darkness threading darkness,
seams stitching into larger silhouettes that no longer matched their owners. Some shapes had too many fingers, or faces turned inward, or gaping holes where mouths should be. They swayed in time with a rhythm only they could hear. "Saints preserve us," a guardsman murmured. Reen snapped, "Counter litany, page 91. The perimeter dropped to one knee again. "Blessed be the closed gate. Blessed be the sealed key." Their voices shook, but held. I recorded
every detail into my data slate. The inverted timestamps now showed not future minutes, but entire hours, looping backward and forward. My notes appeared before I wrote them, then blurred, then settled again. The three-note motif we had lived with since arrival rose from the walls once more, but not as a motif. It was a full hymn now, a huge slow chord that bent the steel ribs overhead. Rivets screamed, banners tore themselves upward. My teeth vibrated. The Margot's mechadendrites trembled, tips sparking. Imperium resonance threshold exceeded, he intoned. No containment. Wren pressed his comm bead. Command, confirm extraction order. A thin voice answered, one of the orbiting ship's junior officers. Sir, inquisitorial sigils received contradict your transmission. Orders from high authority. Remain in situ. Do not break perimeter, Wren swore. High authority? Identify. Static. Then another voice. Older, iron hard. By warrant of the Ordo Hereticus, you are to hold position until convergence is complete. Rain shut off his bead, face white. They want us to die here, he said quietly. I whispered, or to witness. The hymn climbed, twisting my stomach. Frost cracked outward from the children's feet across the ceiling, forming a glowing mandala whose lines dripped warp light like molten glass. The children's mouths opened wider. Their reversed catechisms bled into the hymn until words lost meaning. Shadows broke free entirely. The stitched masses slid across the floor like oil given will, circling the perimeter. They touched no one, but their cold passed through armor. My breath fogged in geometric shapes. Wren ordered bayonets fixed, though no one dared fire. If they touch you, recite the third benediction and fall back. Do not break formation, the Margos whispered to me. We stand at the birth of a warp entity keyed to human resonance. If it completes, the Imperium may gain a saint or lose a sector. I stared at the glowing sigil overhead. And we're inside the womb. My data slate vibrated, screen flooding with a single sentence repeated in my field shorthand. The witness must remain until the circle is closed. The hymn crescendoed. The stitched shadows converged toward the center of the chamber, spiraling into a funnel. Banners flapped upward, exposing those alien geometries again. Laser gun packs whined under spontaneous charge fluctuations. The children moved for the first time since entering the reliquary. They stepped down from the ceiling in perfect inversion, landing lightly on the floor inside the funnel of shadows. Each face was blank of expression, eyes milky with warp light. They joined hands, forming a circle inside the mandala that now blazed like a sun of ice. I lifted my stylus, but my hand shook too much to write. Reen whispered a prayer under his breath. The hymn reached a note beyond hearing. My vision trembled. The joined shadows reared up around the circle like black flames. Then, silence. In that silence, the children vanished. No flash, no smoke. One instant there, the next gone, leaving only a ring of tiny footprints glowing with warp fire on the frost. The after image of my own shadow detached from me again and leaned forward, as if peering into the empty circle. Somewhere above, metal screamed, the orbiting ship, or the vault itself. The chill of the reliquary had deepened to a static frost that clung to every exposed edge of armor. The children's footprints burned faintly in warp fire on the cracked tiles. Yet no one dared move toward them. Sergeant Wren's squad huddled in an uneasy perimeter, weapons raised but unsteady. Every man's visor fogged from breaths, drawn in tremulous rhythm. I clutched my data slate, documenting the unnatural geometries, the inverted banners, the shadows that still wriggled like living cords across the floor. The Magos biologist stood before the central mandala, his mechadendrites twitching with a cadence that had no known rhythm in any Imperial metrology. The limbs extended and retracted in pulses that seemed to sync with the warp fire traces of the vanished children. He murmured in Binharic, the guttural syllables dissolving into an unholy harmony with the residual hymn. I had begun to suspect his intent before he spoke. Now he confirmed it. "I did not bring you here to merely observe," he intoned. His voice echoed from the frozen walls, cold and precise. "The cradle's machines are engines of prediction, keyed to human resonance. These children are my catalysts. They will foresee trajectories, outcomes, and Imperium-wide deviations, an oracle born of warp-fragmented psychers." The squad remained silent, unsure whether to acknowledge the man or the impossible reality of his declaration. Their training demanded discipline, but every instinct screamed of betrayal. "Your faith in bureaucratic procedure is quaint, Sergeant," the Magos continued. "Yet here, in the womb of the reliquary, your faith is insufficient. Observe, record, understand," one of the guardsmen, young and tight-lipped, let out a shuddering laugh. You used children," he said, voice breaking. "Predicted. What? Death?" The Margot's left mechadendrite twitched, and I swear it curled as if mocking the speaker. "No," he said, almost kindly. "Potential, probability, preservation. Only the naive fear terminology." He lifted a child from the mandala's vanished circle. The boy or girl, it was impossible to discern in the phosphorescent light, remained utterly still, eyes blank, as if time itself refused to pass through their pupils. The Magos carried the child to the central relic console, a corroded lattice of cogitators and skull-like nodes. Each node pulsed in weak cyan light, synchronized with the mechadendrite's twitch. I watched as he grafted the child's skull into a socket atop the data core. The bone fused with metal in seconds. Not pain, but a sickly integration hum, vibrating through the floor. The child's body collapsed into the Magos' arms, a lifeless husk. Yet the skull, now part of the machine, blinked with a cold luminescence, whispered echoes, fragments of devotions, and the three-note motif slithered into the room from the console's circuits. The guard reacted. Ran barked, "Stand down or fire at will." But the soldiers hesitated. Their training dictated obedience. Yet the sight before them violated all tactical reason. One laser gun discharged accidentally. The bolt struck the floor and evaporated into warp sparks instead of piercing the tile. The Magos did not flinch. His mechadendrites adjusted, almost gracefully, absorbing the discharge like a conductor collecting stray notes into symphony. "Weapons are meaningless here," he said. "Do not defy the laws you cannot comprehend." Reen's hands shook on his rifle. "We're mutinying," he admitted, to no one in particular. "We either stop this, or we die witnesses." The Magos' head tilted. Witnessing is duty. Defiance is temporary. His fingers tapped a sequence on a secondary console. Small illuminated symbols flowing upward like liquid ink. Then the reliquary walls groaned, the steel beams bending subtly, the vaulted ceiling oscillating as if breathing. A low hum rose from the mandala footprints. The children's warp signature surged back into form. The glow solidified into shapes, rising from the floor and coalescing above the relic console. They merged seamlessly, bone and warp light fusing, until a towering figure stood where once the children had vanished. The form was translucent, ethereal, yet unmistakably saint-like. Long robes interwoven with flickering warp threads, faceless, hands extended as if to receive both homage and judgment. The guardsman froze, a tableau of disbelief. I felt my own pulse hammering against the frost, not from fear, but from awe. The Magos straightened, mechadendrites extending fully toward the apparition. "Behold the predictive saint," he said, "the culmination of centuries of planning, breeding, and heretical synthesis." One of the soldiers dared a step forward. The saint's shape shifted, twisting in a way that suggested movement inside and outside the laws of space. Shadows twisted along its form, some thick as ropes, others delicate as spider's silk, all coiling to connect with the mandala's warp fire residues on the floor. The room's temperature dropped sharply, breath freezing midair into crystalline shards. Reen shouted, "Fall back!" But the perimeter was already compromised. Some soldiers' shadows, still partially stitched from the previous chapter, reached toward the saint and dissolved into its mass, leaving only empty armor behind. I noticed my own data slate flicker. The written notes, fresh only seconds ago, now displayed predictions of our deaths and outcomes of this experiment. The numbers shifted as I watched, every path branching, collapsing, and branching again. My hand hovered over the stylus, unable to interrupt the machine's operation. The Magos' mechadendrites twitched in synchrony with the saint's heartbeat, if a shape so alien could be said to possess one. Sparks leapt along the cables and conduits, small arcs connecting to the floor, then rising into the saint. Each flash illuminated the frozen faces of soldiers, still holding their bayonets in trembling hands. "Do you see?" the Magos whispered. "Every outcome is known, every path predicted, and yet all depends on your recording, scribe." I nodded silently. Duty bound me. Fear did not matter. My stylus captured every motion, every warp fluctuation, every breath of light. The saint shifted, leaning slightly toward the console where the child skull had fused. A whisper emanated, not human, not mechanical, but both. A litany that spanned decades of warp-harvested souls, singing through bone, machine, and fleshless memory. From the far corner of the reliquary, another shadow detached, moved independently, and joined the saint's base. It was Rin's shadow, his own body now a hollow shell, but his essence captured in darkness. The guard mutinied in fragmented panic, retreating toward the walls, yet the stitched silhouettes corralled them back into the circle. I realized suddenly that the saint was not merely predictive. It was a sentinel, a gestalt entity composed of warp, flesh, and pure calculation. The children, now fused, were both themselves and more than themselves. The room resonated with a frequency I could feel in my teeth, my bones and the data slate trembling in my hands. Then the Magos raised his head and spoke one final terrible truth. The Imperium will never know their saints. Only we, the custodians of synthesis, witness their ascension, and you, scribe, shall record their eternity. The floor beneath me thrummed. The reliquary was no longer a room, but a nexus. The saint extended one translucent hand toward the ceiling, and I understood that the breach we had feared was not just vertical, but temporal, psychic, and bureaucratic. No one moved. Even the mechadendrites ceased twitching, awaiting command or consent. The hymn that had haunted us for hours now roared through the vault, a composite of every chant, every three-note motif, every inverted catechism. And through it all, the children, no longer children, stood as a single towering translucent saint shape, heralding the convergence of warp, flesh, and predictive logic. The reliquary trembles beneath my boots. Every step echoes in walls that were never meant to house such defiance of nature. The saint shape towers before us, a composite of children and warp, translucent yet undeniably present. Its form shivers with pulse-like motion, and I feel the floor beneath my feet flexing, as if the world itself is bending in acknowledgement. A silent scream emanates from the entity, not audible, yet I hear it in my teeth, in the marrow of my bones. My eyes water, but the air carries no moisture. My head throbs with the resonance of 1,000 fractured voices. I move closer, compelled, though every instinct screams for retreat. The mechadendrites of the magos twitch in a rhythm that mirrors the entity's internal oscillation, each spiny limb brushing the edges of the reliquary with precise surgical intent. The guardsmen cluster at the walls, pale, frozen in incomprehension. Their laser guns are useless. Any discharge vanishes into thin air, leaving only scorched after images of the weapons and faint traces of heat in the tile. I grip my data slate tighter. The words flow in real time, almost as if the scribe I am is dictated by something external, something alive within the warp. Present tense overtakes my usual narrative cadence. The saint shape moves, stretches, and unfurls in arcs of warped light. Its arms extend toward me. I feel the air displace, a viscous resistance that presses against my chest. Tendons, I imagine, fuse and stretch across my perception, connecting me to every child, every echo, every fragment of litany. The sensory overload escalates. Blue-tinged shadows crawl along the walls, coalescing into rib-like spines that reach out and retract, brushing against the floor. A guardsman screams silently. The sound seems lodged in my teeth, vibrating in resonance with the warp. I taste copper and ash simultaneously, a combination both alien and intimately familiar. The hymn, the three-note motif expanded into a full, omnipresent litany, twists reality around us. Candles along the walls flare white-hot and collapse into smoke before the wax even melts. The air hums with unbreathable resonance. Yet I continue to record. I catch sight of the children's faces within the saint shape. Their milk-white eyes reflect both wonder and terror. Their mouths move in perfect synchrony, repeating words that do not exist in any codex I have ever known. They articulate a beatification never sanctioned, a miracle never witnessed, and yet their words, fragmented, warp-infused, etch themselves onto my perception like iron on steel. Something brushes against my arm. I look down. Nothing. Yet the feeling persists, like cold fingertips grazing the marrow. The saint shape's arms swing slowly, deliberately, tracing arcs that contradict the geometry of the room. Every time its tendrils cross the floor, shadows elongate unnaturally, stitching the guardsman to the tiles. One corporal collapses, not dead, but fused, shadow and flesh indistinguishable. The after-image of a man who once held laser gun, now a coiling echo in warp light. I hear a whisper. My name, not my voice, not my stylus, not my annotations. The entity knows it inherently, intrinsically,
as if the act of recording has granted me both recognition and vulnerability. I stop. My hand hovers over the data slate, every instinct screaming to flee. Yet the
Sane Shape's gaze, if such a thing can be called gaze, penetrates the marrow, reaching the very letters of my name in my mind. The Margos biologist observes silently. His mechadendrites twitch in coordination with the entity's pulses, as if both were instruments tuned to the same impossible frequency. "It knows you," he says quietly, his voice almost drowned by the ambient resonance. "That is the purpose. Witness and be witnessed. Prediction requires both. I feel the room compress around me, angles shifting impossibly. Vaulted ceilings bend downward, columns twist, and the mosaics on the floor spiral in impossible topologies. The hymn reverberates, every note vibrating directly against neural pathways, bypassing ears altogether. I lose track of the guardsmen, or perhaps they cease to matter. Only I remain in focus, the scribe and observer, the target of both miracle and corporeal horror. My body moves without consent. I step closer, compelled by the latent authority of the Saint Shape. My feet barely touch the floor. Tendrils, neither mechanical nor wholly organic, wrap around my legs, brushing against armor and robes alike, leaving a tingling warmth that feels like static in nerve endings. Every step is mirrored in shadow. Every shadow is mirrored in reality. The floor beneath me pulses in a rhythm that feels like both heartbeat and warp tick. I glance at the data slate. The annotations are no longer mine. Lines of text move, correct themselves, and fold into new permutations. Predictive probabilities bloom across the screen. Death vectors, warp flux readings, unsanctioned miracles, unbaptized souls, each more impossible than the last. The Saint Shape bends slightly forward, reaching for the scribe who had never given his name aloud. I feel the touch before it occurs. A cold wave, unbroken by space, brushes my arm. My veins ice over, yet heat spikes at my core. The hymn crescendos, the three-note motif, now a full chorus that bends the air, the shadows, the tiles themselves. Tendons, I imagine, stretch across the room, linking me to the entity and the relic machines that hum in quiet counterpoint. Every thought I possess echoes back at me as prophecy. The scribe's mind a map for the saint's comprehension. Then the entity halts, just short of contact. The air becomes viscous, sound a tangible medium. The milk-white eyes of the children within the Saint Shape stare directly into me. I feel a tug, not violent, not threatening, but inevitable. I realize I am part of the pattern now. Observation is no longer neutral. Participation is mandatory. My stylus hovers over the data slate, but it is not I who commands the strokes. The recording itself has become the ritual, and the ritual compels me. The Margos remains still, mechadendrites twitching in perfect rhythm with the saint's pulse. He does not intervene, nor does he speak further. I understand that my presence is both instrument and witness, necessary for the completion of the entity's function. Probability, prediction, corporeal synthesis, all converge upon my observation. A tendril arcs toward me, translucent and cold. The hymn pulses once more, and the entity shifts its massive form slightly, aligning perfectly with the reliquary's architecture. I can feel every heartbeat, every breath, every whispered syllable of litany, as if my own physiology has merged with the warp-infused choir. I realize then, the saint of the unborn march knows my name because it requires me. Observation and recorded probability, every note, every shadow, every after image, binds me into its unfolding calculus. Escape is irrelevant. Resistance is irrelevant. Duty compels recording, and the saint will not allow deviation. And in that instant, I understand the enormity of the betrayal, not just of the Imperium's laws, not of faith, but of reality itself. The entity reaches for me, a slow, inevitable gesture, and the reliquary shivers with anticipation. My name echoes in the silent scream, entwined with the hymn, entwined with the warp, and entwined with the saint. The air thickens, the hymn expands. The entity leans closer, and I, the scribe, cannot look away. The reliquary quakes again, though the tiles remain unbroken. Every footfall echoes back in counterpoint, each sound split and warped, replaying in impossible sequences. The guardsmen shuffle nervously, their laser guns trembling in hands that sweat despite the freezing air. Orders spill from command vox: fire, retreat, consolidate, but every command is instantly contradicted, not by the enemy, but by the environment itself. Rounds vanish into the chamber before they can leave the barrels. When they do discharge, they return to strike the guardsmen in their own positions, ricocheting off invisible planes with surgical precision. I record, hand shaking, voice taut with disbelief. Each note of the children's litany, once 3, now expanded into a syncopated countdown, pulses through the chamber like a warp-infused clock. The cadence is relentless, beating against bone, teeth, and the marrow of all present. My data slate flickers with incomprehensible readings, temporal distortion indices, probability vectors, and residual psychic signatures that should be impossible. Time itself has become a loop, repeating, layering, and folding back upon itself. Every failed tactic the guard attempts is mirrored, inverted, and repeated. Yet they cannot discern the pattern. The children's faces, if faces they still are, float in and out of visibility within the saint shape, shifting like smoke caught in a subsonic wind. Milk-white eyes fix on me in recognition and accusation, as if aware that I am both witness and conduit. Every action I take is mirrored by an after-image that moves independently, yet in perfect synchrony with the warp entity. Even writing becomes ritual. The strokes of my stylus bleed into the air, tracing patterns that shimmer and dissipate, leaving residue on the chamber's surfaces, impossible to clean or erase. The Magos biologist observes silently, mechadendrites twitching as if in communion with the entity. He does not speak, does not intervene. The guardsmen grow desperate. One corporal swings a chainsword into the empty space of the chamber. Flesh, shadow, and weapon coalescing into an echo of violence that strikes no target. Yet the air thickens where the blow passes, vibrating against the skull like a bell rung in reverse. Each failure compounds the entity's influence, bending perception, reality, and the rules of combat into grotesque symmetry. I realize that the saint shape, the fused children, the warp-saturated choir, is not merely observing. It is rewriting the pilgrimage itself, attempting to overwrite our presence into a new ritual timeline. Every chant, every step, every annotation I record becomes part of the unfolding calculus. The 3-note motif, now a full countdown, pulses through my consciousness. 1, 2, 3. Pause. Repeat, building anticipation with mechanical precision. Each pulse drags my heart into rhythm with a schedule I cannot alter. Guardsmen fire again. Last blasts swirl in impossible arcs, ricocheting and returning to strike their own units. The room itself seems complicit. Beams from overhead lamps bend in midair, aligning with the warp's geometry. Shadows stretch along walls, twisting in ways that contradict the sources of light. One sergeant screams. a sound that fractures into multiple echoes, each pitched differently, all silent yet undeniable. I sense, more than hear, the entity's intention. This is judgment without mouths, a verdict enacted without trial, delivered by beings incapable of speech as we understand it. I watch the guardsmen attempt withdrawal. Each step retraces another, every motion looping back. My stylus records the loops, annotating, cross-referencing, yet my words feel futile. Time is no longer linear. Seconds stack atop seconds, creating strata of experience both past and future. A guardsman falls. The after image rises in perfect alignment with the previous collapse. Tactical maneuvers fold in on themselves. Walls appear where none existed before. Barricades manifest mid-step, and yet the children move calmly, as if aware of the futility. A magnetic pulse, imperceptible yet undeniably present, sweeps the chamber. Laser gun batteries flicker, energy cores overheat, Vox communications stutter. Orders from orbit contradict local inquisitorial sigils, yet the contradictions resolve themselves automatically, each directive folding neatly into the entity's ritual. I realize then that obedience is irrelevant. Only observation matters. We are participants in a script written before we arrived, actors in a play staged across warp and flesh. I attempt to reason. If I record every anomaly, will the timeline stabilize? If I intervene, can I disrupt the cycle? Questions echo unanswered, bouncing along the chamber's warped surfaces. Sensory spikes, metallic taste, subsonic resonance, thermal inversions, compound with every second. Candles flare blue and collapse in midair. Shadows coil into grotesque silhouettes, and the children's chant becomes a living pulse, a countdown that drags both mind and body toward the inevitable. Then, clarity. Only one exit remains. Not upward, not back toward the domed halls of Clythe's 9, but deeper, into the planet's crust. The entity does not prevent movement. It merely ensures that the choice carries consequence. Every pathway back loops into itself, temporal mirrors reflecting futility. The saint shape shifts, arms lowering slightly, guiding attention toward the fissure that descends. A faint glow emits from below, warm yet unsettling, as if the crust itself houses a latent will. Guardsmen hesitate, recognizing instinctively that retreat is not an option. Their discipline clashes with fear, ritual horror overlaying military realism. Orders dissolve into whispers, and whispers into silent dread. I feel the entity's gaze, my name echoing again, pulling at the edges of my consciousness. We are to descend. Observation compels action. Action completes ritual, and ritual sustains the timeline. Resistance is moot. I glance once more at the data slate. Annotations have multiplied, predictive vectors now outlining outcomes for every conceivable action. Every loop, every failed tactic, every echo of last fire and prayer is mapped, catalogued, and integrated into the saint shape's gestalt. Even my own after-image appears on the slate, moving independently, participating in actions I have yet to take. It is no longer possible to distinguish reality from reflection. The countdown reaches its next pulse. 1, 2, 3. The air thickens, shadows stitch closer to flesh, and the children's milk-white eyes pierce through perception itself. I feel the pull of inevitability, the weight of ritualed judgment, and the singular direction of movement. Downward into the abyssal sanctum, where the final rites will unfold. I take the first step toward the fissure, boots crunching against warped tiles. Behind me, guardsmen follow, reluctant yet compelled.
The saint shape hovers, ethereal and immense, guiding, observing, preparing to fold the final layers of our presence into the new ritual timeline. And as the first foot enters the deeper tunnel, the three-note motif, our omnipresent, warp-infused countdown, resounds inside my mind, ticking like a clock that measures not seconds, but inevitability. The journey continues, only deeper, only into the planet's crust. The entity waits, silent yet omnipotent, and I, the scribe, step forward, compelled to document every impossible, horrifying moment. The tunnel finally opens into a vast, cavernous expanse. The air is heavy, viscous, as if each breath carries the weight of centuries. My boots echo hollowly against black marble flooring polished to unnatural.
Reflection. Before me stretches an amphitheatre carved for children. Rows of tiny seats lined in concentric circles, all facing a pulpit that floats impossibly in mid-air, empty yet commanding. The curvature of the chamber amplifies every whisper, every heartbeat, into a low, resonant hum that thrums against bone and mind alike. Warp storms coil beneath the marble like aurora captured in stone. Flickers of green and violet light pulse through fissures in the ceiling, refracting off surfaces with geometric precision. The three-note motif has intensified, now omnipresent, vibrating in subsonic frequencies that twist perception. I clutch my data slate, fingers trembling, as readings climb beyond the thresholds of comprehension. Psychic resonance, temporal anomaly indices, and residual life forces all spike simultaneously. Something ancient stirs here, older than the Ministorum, older than the Imperium itself. Descending the amphitheatre steps, I notice the seats. Every chair etched with glyphs I recognize from Mechanicus codices, yet subtly wrong. Symbols of containment, ritual, and matricidal sanctity intertwine with depictions of faceless children, exactly like the ones we have escorted here. I realize with a sudden and sickening clarity that these chairs are prepared, anticipating the arrival of the pilgrimage we so meticulously recorded. At the pulpit, I discover a metallic panel embedded in the marble. Upon activation, a faint glow traces along the edges of the carvings, revealing a hidden inquisitorial order, centuries old. The containment order, a directive to exterminate all warp-tainted children, to cleanse Clythe's 9 of the anomaly. It was never executed. Whoever commanded it, whoever wrote the codex, disappeared into history, leaving the pilgrimage untouched. The knowledge weighs like stone on my shoulders. I am the first to find it, yet also the last who might act. The guardsmen huddle behind me, laser guns poised though powerless against the chamber's laws. Their eyes dart at the floating pulpit, the aurora-torn marble, and the faint outlines of the saint shape that hovers just beyond perception. The children are absent, yet their presence is undeniable. A subtle vibration, a heat distortion, a whisper of milk, white eyes brushing against the corners of my vision. They have become something else, something that defies our understanding. And I sense the final transformation is imminent. I reach for the Exterminatus beacon, the last vestige of Imperial control, and begin the activation sequence. The lights along its casing flicker, screens illuminate, and a deep hum begins, resonating in anticipation. I speak the final command. The sequence stalls. Nothing happens. My hands tremble as I inspect the device. Circuits intact, power core active, yet the signal refuses to propagate. Frustration turns to horror as the truth asserts itself. Centuries ago, someone disabled the beacon. Not a child, Not a warp entity, not the saint shape, but an agent, human, mechanicus, or inquisitorial, who understood what would come and chose inaction. The Imperium's last safeguard, a tool to purge Clythe's 9, lies impotent in my hands. The realization is suffocating. I am witness to the culmination of an experiment unbound by authority, an event meticulously unopposed by those charged with containment. The chamber itself reacts. The marble pulses, veins of light tracing through walls and floors, guiding attention to the empty pulpit. The aurora beneath the stone intensifies, now a tornado of color, soundless yet deafening. The saint shape begins to materialize above the pulpit, faint at first, then coalescing into a towering entity of warp-infused light and shadow. Its form echoes the amphitheater below, replicating the seats, the glyphs, the children, and me. It is both culmination and mirror, and it regards me with awareness that chills the marrow. Every instinct screams to flee, yet the geometry of the chamber forbids it. Steps toward any exit fold back upon themselves. The amphitheater spirals, loops, and rearranges to prevent deviation from the ritual path. The children's chant, once 3 notes, once a simple melody, now fills every corner, every crevice, forming a full litany that bends reality. Each syllable resonates through the marble, generating heat, cold, light, and shadow simultaneously. I cannot move without touching the warp-tuned lattice that binds the chamber. I consider the guardsmen. Discipline has frayed. Muttering and hushed prayers replace shouted orders. Their laser guns feel impotent, mere gestures in a play they cannot influence. One reaches for the beacon, hoping perhaps to reset it, but the device remains inert. No action will purge the chamber. The entity above the pulpit acknowledges us. No, it acknowledges me specifically. Its attention settling on the scribe who wrote the pilgrimage into existence. I weigh my options. Activation of the beacon is impossible. Retreat into the tunnels merely prolongs the inevitable. The loops of time will drag us back, steps retraced, each failure rehearsed. Observation, I realize, is now both duty and a curse. Every note, every word, every scribal mark I make is folded into the entity's final configuration. I cannot act as an agent of destruction. I can only bear witness to the consummation of centuries of occult engineering, warp breeding, and mechanicus interference. The amphitheater shifts subtly, chairs turning inward toward the pulpit, as if anticipating congregation. The aurora beneath the marble forms patterns I recognize, previously noted in warp-piloted frigates, sigils of synthesis, crucibles of the mind, the blueprint of Gestalt consciousness. The children, though unseen, are everywhere at once, present in sound, in light, in shadow. Their hymn, a crescendo of warped reality, pulls at the edges of thought, forcing comprehension beyond sanity. I begin to write. Words on the data slate are inadequate. Symbols, annotations, layered temporal notations, glyphs from Mechanicus codices, marginalia of inquisitorial directives, all pour forth in frantic necessity. If these records survive, they may serve as warning. If they fail, then history itself will be rewritten in the service of the warp-born entity. The countdown, the 3-note motif, flickers now as a cadence within my own heartbeat, guiding the final act. A faint, almost imperceptible pulse radiates from the empty pulpit. The aurora beneath us swirls into a vortex, lifting dust, ash, and memory into a silent cyclone. The saint shape coalesces fully, children fused, warp energies harmonized, The chorus of the cradle realized in immaterial flesh and light. The amphitheater anticipates. The entity awaits. And I, the scribe, stand at the threshold, unable to activate, unable to retreat, and unable to avert the culmination. The exterminatus beacon remains inert, the order never executed. The pilgrimage's final transformation proceeds unchecked. And as the entity extends its warp-formed hands toward the amphitheater, I brace for the moment when observation becomes part of the ritual itself, and the hollow planet core reveals its purpose. Not destruction, not salvation, but a rewriting of all those who dared enter. The amphitheater trembles beneath unseen pressure. The aurora beneath the black marble floor pulses like a heartbeat, each flicker synchronizing with the three-note motif now transformed into a full, resonant hymn. Shadows twist along the walls, not cast by any physical form, but by the warp energy that saturates the chamber. And then it happens. The children's gestalt collapses. No longer dozens of whispers, no longer scattered presences, but a singular figure coalescing from fractured light and shadow. A saint with no face, its hands outstretched, hovering above the empty pulpit. It does not move toward us in aggression, yet its presence dominates the amphitheater. The temperature shifts violently. A biting cold radiates from its form, yet simultaneously the air burns against my skin. I sense every hair follicle reacting, every nerve ending stretched taut as the entity examines us with an attention that is both intimate and omniscient. Dust motes float lazily in the inverted light. Yet they are not random. They align into shifting script, litanies that writhe and fold over one another, spelling prayers I cannot understand but feel etched into memory. I falter, heart hammering against ribs, mind struggling to reconcile the impossible. The saint does not speak, yet I hear its intention in the tremor of the chamber, in the pulse of the marble beneath my feet. It extends its faceless hands, and from the warplit air a relic cradle descends, suspended in defiance of gravity. Crafted of interlocking obsidian and ivory, it hums with energy, faintly inscribed with mechanicus runes and sacred inquisitorial symbols. Light bends along its edges, casting impossible angles into the amphitheater, creating reflections that are not reflections, but echoes of other worlds, other timelines. I step closer, compelled by instinct and dread alike. Every step feels like wading through water of unknown viscosity, each motion resisted by unseen pressure. The cradle hovers a fraction above the floor, yet the aura it radiates suggests a weight far beyond comprehension. I reach out, hand trembling, and the saint's energy responds. The space around me warps subtly. The air thickens, then thins. Sound collapses into silence so absolute it draws blood from my ears, and the familiar three-note motif reverberates in a loop that I can feel inside my skull rather than hear. The guards form a perimeter, laser guns raised, but hesitation freezes them. Firing seems impossible. The entity absorbs intention itself, rendering aggression meaningless. I notice, in peripheral vision, the marble seats, the tiny amphitheater for children, shift slightly, as if acknowledging that their collective form is now contained in the singular saint. The movement is not mechanical, nor psychic alone. It is ceremonial, deliberate, a folding of purpose into one coherent gestalt. A horrifying realization grips me. The entity does not need to attack. Its intent is not violence, but embodiment. The cradle is a vessel, an anchor, and the anchor requires a host in real space. I glance around. No child fits the physical scale. Only an adult, myself or a guardsman, could occupy the cradle. My breath freezes as I comprehend the full implication. The saint does not ask, it offers, and the offer is not negotiable. It is destiny. The room distorts around the cradle. The floating litanies spin faster, forming a vortex of letters and symbols that hover in 3 dimensions. The air vibrates with subsonic hymns, each pulse resonating with the marrow of my bones. My hand brushes the cradle, and for a fraction of a second, I see potential futures unfold. The entity merged with my essence, timelines diverging, reality folding upon itself. One choice preserves the pilgrimage in its current trajectory. Another allows the warp-born saint to fully anchor, rewriting Clive's 9, and perhaps more, in its image. The saint shifts, tilting slightly, faceless gaze directed toward me. I can feel its awareness like a pressure against my chest, its silent scrutiny peeling away layers of fear, duty, and ego. Each guardsman stiffens as the pressure radiates outward. The temperature oscillates violently. My breath misses despite the sudden, oppressive heat. Dust motes rise to meet the cradle, swirling into readable patterns for those attuned to the warp, spelling sequences of ancient rituals, fragments of Mechanicus schematics, and inquisitorial prohibitions that no longer apply. I consider retreat, but the geometry of the hollow core disallows it. Corridors fold back upon themselves. Walls seem to breathe, shifting imperceptibly to guide all movement toward the cradle. Exiting would mean walking into recursive loops, each attempt folding time upon itself, amplifying the hymn and accelerating the anchor's gestation. Observation is no longer passive. It is complicit. Every glance, every heartbeat, every breath contributes to the formation of the entity. A subtle vibration courses through the marble floor. The saint extends its arms further. The cradle descends, aligning perfectly with the geometry of the amphitheater. The air becomes viscous, charged with energy that presses against neural pathways. The 3-note motif accelerates into a crescendo, vibrating through bone and sinew. I feel as if I am being measured, calculated, and selected. The realization crystallizes. One life is required, one human essence to complete the final gestation. I glance at the guardsmen. They are frozen, eyes wide, comprehension dawning. None can escape this inevitable calculus. I see their reflections in the polished marble, multiplied infinitely along the curvature of the amphitheater. Time itself seems elastic, stretching around the cradle and the saint, every potential action accounted for and negated. The entity does not coerce, it merely presents, and in presenting, it mandates. And then the cradle opens, its contours subtly shifting to accommodate a single, adult occupant. The void within is impossibly deep, dark yet luminous, an emptiness that calls with the weight of all the children who contributed to the gestalt. I step back, hand frozen above the data slate. The saint's faceless gaze fixes on me, with undeniable intent. Silence so profound that my ears bleed envelops the chamber, punctuated only by the final escalating pulse of the 3-note motif. I comprehend the final truth. Participation is no longer optional. The cradle waits, the entity awaits, and Clyde's 9, the cradle, the pilgrimage, the amphitheater, is poised on the cusp of transformation. The saint's faceless hands stretch toward the open vessel, and in that instant I realize the warp-born entity requires more than observation. It requires an anchor, and the only anchor in reach is me. Recovered from the void hull of an escaped lifeboat, the report is fragmented. Vox static interlaces the text,
Segments of Binharic, half corrupted, half intact, bleed through the margins, as if the language itself resists full comprehension. My hand writes compulsively, though each stroke feels guided by another presence. I do not know if I am the scribe or the host, observer or anchor. The words are ritual, confession, and warning all at once. Coordinates. Clythes 9. Do not approach, I begin, though the pen trembles and the letters twist in upon themselves. Each stroke resonates like the three-note motif, now an eternal pulse embedded into the timbre of my mind. The children's chant persists, recorded in vox relays that hum faintly across the segmentum, though the shrine world lies silent beneath frozen clouds. It is not a recording. It is not memory. It is
resonance, presence. The report fragments further. Cradle open. Entity manifested. Faceless. Gestation complete. Anchor required. My hand continues even as comprehension falters. The lifeboat shudders against inertial currents, though sensors report no turbulence. Time itself seems smeared. Moments folded over themselves, and I am left suspended between chronology and eternal recurrence. I write, not because I recall, but because the ritual demands transcription. Every phrase carries dual meaning, literal report, and invocation. Guardsman ash. Armor remains. Children coalesced. Orbit reports Geller collapse. The lines skip, interrupted by static that is somehow alive, twisting the words into hidden syllables, half understood by my conscious mind. Footnotes and margin scribbles contain fragments. Do not fire. Observation insufficient. Warp resonance fatal. It is unclear who the caution addresses, those reading, or me. I recount the mechanism of containment. The amphitheater, the black marble core, the relic cradle, the saint with no face. All exist now as event and echo simultaneously. My memory, if it can be called memory, folds inward. I remember stepping toward the cradle, feeling the pressure of intent that weighed more than a bane blade. I remember the faceless saint extending its arms, offering completion and inevitability in a gesture more precise than any weapon. And yet I am here, or perhaps only a fragment remains. Sensory imprint endures. Silence so loud it draws blood. Air thick and thin at once. Dust motes spinning into litany. Pulse of the three notes, vibrating bone and skull. The chant continues in my mind, but now it is broadcast beyond me, rippling through vox grids that should be dormant. Every relay across the sector hums the children's hymn, faint and almost imperceptible, yet impossible to ignore. Anyone approaching the coordinates will hear, will feel. The warning is embedded into reality itself. Exfiltration attempted. Exterminatus beacon, disabled centuries prior. Entity gestated. I write in a cadence unbroken by fear, because fear is irrelevant. Time, intention, and presence have become ceremonial. My writing duplicates itself in folds, each line repeated across the data slate, like the children's files replicated every 66 minutes. Even the act of observation contributes to the entity's continuity. Fragments of guard testimony survive in footnotes. Weapons failed, rounds return, perimeter compromised, lace fire after images, shadow stitching. Their words echo, disjointed, half understood. The bureaucratic directives from orbit, now meaningless sigils, are crossed out by hand in ink that smells faintly of iron and ozone. The children's presence cannot be contained by orders, protocols, or canon. It requires adherence to a different ritual, one older than the segmentum itself. I attempt to record my own name,
but the text warps mid-stroke. It
is as if the saint's essence presses through ink and fiber, co-opting identity, merging observer and observed. Half-formed Binharic syllables appear unbidden. Ikra, Tenha, Vash. I cannot translate, yet the cadence resonates as litany, warning and containment. Each fragment of script is both documentation and invocation, both report and ritual. The final segments describe a sector-wide containment posture. Do not approach, repeated with geometric insistence, is not suggestion. The coordinates themselves are forbidden zones now. Any vessel attempting entry, any psyker probing the sanctum, will trigger resonance, activating patterns of warp-infused energy embedded by the saint's formation. The children, or what they have become, persist beyond physical reality, inhabiting frequencies inaccessible to conventional measurement. Vox recordings, archived in scattered relays, carry echoes of their chant. It is impossible to determine if the chant is projected from the lifeboat or imprinted in the sector's ether. Sensors report silence on Clythe's 9, yet data logs intermittently spike with unexplainable warp flux coinciding with nothing, planetary rotation, orbit, or guard patrol. The chronicle ends without resolution, yet the threat endures, a spectral continuity beyond institutional control. The last lines I managed to write collapse into repetition, ritualized cadence spiraling inward, witness records, anchor uncertain, entity gestated, chant persists, do not approach, coordinates sealed. The pen falters, ink pools, warps. I lift it and stare at the words, unable to distinguish if I wrote them, if the saint wrote them, or if they exist independently of either. My reflection in the data slate is fragmented, multiplied. Is this me, or merely the imprint of a consciousness drawn into the entity's gestalt? And finally, the children's chant continues, faintly but audibly, drifting through the void, through vox grids and communications satellites, a signal embedded in the very fabric of the sector. Clythe's 9 remains silent, frozen beneath its furnaces, its cradle beneath the basilica empty, yet pregnant with potential. The containment order is enforced in name only. In practice, it is ritual, warning, and threat, unresolved and eternal. The report ends abruptly. No signature, no conclusion. Only the resonance remains. A final stinger for those who dare to approach. Somewhere in the void, the chant pulses, waiting, watching, listening. And if the entity is not anchored in flesh, it exists nonetheless, a warp-born sentinel, guiding, gestating, and containing all that comes near the coordinates marked. Do not approach.